Welcome back to Pulse Check Chronicles. We're continuing on with our haunted hospital Halloween stories with episode number 2, The Screams from Nowhere. Hospitals never really sleep. Even in the middle of the night, there's always some kind of background noise. Machines beeping, carts rolling through, voices can be heard echoing down the hallway. But every once in a while, you get those nights where the building feels empty. Extremely empty. This was one of those nights. It was around 2, 3 in the morning, the typical dead hour when time just drags on. The fluorescent lights above seem too bright for how little is happening. On our side of the ER, things were, dare I say, quiet. Too quiet. We only had 2 patients, both tucked away at the far end of the wing. The rest of the rooms, dark, doors closed, completely empty. I was sitting at the nurse's station, tapping through my charting, trying to fight off the heavy-lidded drowsiness that creeps in during the slow hours. The overhead lights hummed faintly. The only other sound was the scratching of my coworker's pen as she scribbled notes. And that's when I heard it. An unmistakable, undeniable scream. It was faint. It wasn't a maybe I heard something kind of noise. It was loud, sharp, desperate. Someone yelling.
Help me.
Every nerve in my body snapped awake. My head jerked up. I scanned the halls. That's the kind of cry you can't ignore in the ER. Normally you would expect it from a patient in distress. Somebody pulling at the IV line, a confused elderly patient, a psych case coming in out of restraints. But the whole side of the ER, it was empty. The only 2 patients we had were on the other side of the building. I froze, waiting for the sound again, thinking maybe I imagined it. Maybe I fell asleep. Maybe just a figment of my imagination and I just heard something. But then
Help me.
I knew then that I heard it, and it wasn't a figment of my imagination. But what really solidified this in my mind was when I looked at my coworker. Her eyes wide, her face pale. I knew she had heard it too. Before I could even ask, it came again. The same words, the same voice, the same desperate scream for help.
Help me.
This time it was clear. It wasn't coming from the rooms. It was coming from somewhere outside of the ER. Maybe the lobby, maybe outside. Now, usually security covers the front area at night, but we don't have security. And being the only male, it was my job to go investigate. My brain immediately snaps back out of that fear and into that concern. There's someone got to be in the lobby. Someone has to be out front calling. I tried to play it cool. I grabbed my badge and headed toward the lobby. My footsteps echoing on the linoleum as I walked. The sound too loud in the stillness. Every shadow felt stretched out, longer than it should have been. When I reached the lobby, it was completely empty. I mean, completely empty. I asked the registration team if they had heard or seen anything, and they just looked at me dumbfounded. Now, this is a small lobby. You can quickly look around and see the whole thing with a 180-degree turn. There was no one there. The automatic doors stayed shut, glass pane dark, the reflection of the lights on the inside. No one was in there. I waited, listened, my pulse pounding in my ears. But there was nothing, no voices, no movement, no screaming. That meant there's only one other place that it could be coming from. I mustered up the courage and I stepped outside through the automatic doors into the night. The air outside hit me, cool, still, carrying the faint smell of asphalt and cut grass, hint of rain. The parking lot was lit by a buzzing yellow street light. Moths flickering around one of them, bats flying over the helicopter pad. That was it. The only movement I saw. The parking lot, essentially empty. Just employee cars. No cars pulling up. No one frantically trying to wave me down out front. No footsteps echoing. No shadows moving. Just silence. I stood there for a moment as I can feel the goosebumps raising on my arms, scanning every corner and every dark edge. I felt as if someone was watching me, but clearly no one was there. And unfortunately, in my head, I knew I had to do one more thing. I had to walk the entire outside of the hospital to assure myself and anyone else that would ask that no one was out there. So I did. I walked out around the hospital, around the helicopter pad, listening closely for anything. But there was nothing. Just darkness. Some areas darker than others. I tried to hurry along, to not, in my head, get ambushed by something. I essentially circled the entire hospital, unable to find anything. Finally, at that point, I was able to go back inside. I forced out a shaky laugh and told my coworker, "Nothing's out there. Must have been something weird. Maybe the TV in the lobby or something." She looked at me like I was an idiot, not convinced at all. And honestly, neither was I. But we got back to work, tried to push it out of our minds, and then that's when it happened again.
Help me.
This time it was louder and closer, almost right outside the doors. We both immediately froze. My coworker looked at me with eyes the size of dinner plates. You could visibly see the hairs on her arms standing up. I rushed back to the lobby this time, moving as fast as humanly possible. But it was the same result. Empty. Doors shut. Silent. I once again stepped outside, this time walking the sidewalks around the ER entrance. Quickly. My shoes scuffed against the concrete. I peered around every single corner, behind every bench, any landscaping, and even scanned the ambulance bay. Clearly nothing. Not a single trace of anyone who could have been screaming like that. And here's the thing. When someone yells that loud, you can usually tell where it's coming from. Inside a room, down a hall, out in the parking lot. But this, it was like the sound had no direction. It was just there, hanging in the air. Again, I circled the whole building, the back entrances, the loading dock, the side halls. Every step I took, goosebumps on my arms spread further, crawling up my neck. The kind of feeling where you know you're being watched, even if you can't see where from. But still, no one needed help. No one needed assistance. I walked back inside the double doors to the lobby, dumbfounded, creeped out, goosebumps all over my body, cold, tired, and then it happened again.
Help me.
At this point, I'm rattled. I'm extremely terrified. My heart is pounding in my chest. I've run back out through the double doors, rushing every corner I could, around every car, making sure nobody was in any of them playing pranks on us, because now it's getting old. But again, there's nothing. No one is there. I'm dumbfounded. I walk back into the lobby. I look at my coworker and try to tell her the same thing, hoping she didn't hear the other 2 calls when I was out there. And I had to check. My 2 other patients, could it have been them? Maybe I was losing it. Maybe it really was just them with a weird echo. Should have checked on them first. But no. One patient was completely asleep, curled up on their side, monitor steadily beeping. The other, awake, calm, quietly talking with a family member in low voices. I asked if either of them needed anything, and both shook their heads no. That made it worse. Because even if it wasn't them, who could it have been? The screams didn't stop. At least, I feel like they didn't. They came back 3 more times throughout the night, each time just as clear, just as desperate. All I could do was sit at the desk, stiff as a board. I put my headphones in just to get some reprieve. Both my coworker and I staring at each other every time we heard the echo through the halls. There's nothing in your training that tells you what to do in a moment like that. You can give medication, start IVs, run a code, but what do you do when the hospital itself is screaming? By the last time, I didn't even get up. I just sat there with my coworker and the 2 of us silently willing the sun to rise. And finally it did. The first sliver of daylight came through the ER windows, and with it came normal hospital sounds. Call lights buzzing, phones ringing, patients stirring. Life returned to normal, and the screams stopped. Just like that. We clearly never figured out what it was. There weren't any psych patients that night. No wandering visitors. No pranksters, which I really wish it would have been. But nothing was outside. But I'll tell you this. I've worked a lot of night shifts in the ER, pretty much my entire life. And since then, I've heard a lot of things. But that night, those screams, that's one I'll never forget. One thing I forgot to mention about this hospital, it was out in the middle of nowhere, in Arizona, along the reservation. I don't know if I'll ever take one of those contracts ever again. I don't really believe in that, but that night definitely made me think twice. And that's all for tonight. Keep your lights low and your coffee strong. See you on the next night shift. Go ahead and like the video. Consider it your discharge paperwork. Subscribe if you want to get admitted again next week.